It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Milsey, back in the hometown commander. We're back for another episode of Milsey Brews, the show where I'm brewing my version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us on my quest to outbrew the magic world. And as always, the deck list is going to be down in the description below. Today we're continuing my 2023 Roundup series where I'm tackling updating old decks and bringing out some decks I didn't have the chance to brew on the channel. And today we're going back to a deck that I did have built for a little bit, but I actually took it apart. It's a deck that I always enjoyed, a deck that I always played around with Landfall, but also a little bit of Tribal, and of course it's in Temur, so who doesn't enjoy that? And that's Omnath, Locus of the Roil, a 4-mana 3/3 elemental that says whenever it enters the battlefield, it deals damage to any target equal to the number of elementals you control. And then whenever a land enters the battlefield into your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target elemental you control. If you control 8 or more lands, you draw a card. Of course, Locus of the Roil isn't as much of a powerhouse in value as our 4-mana Omnath is, but I think that what I like about this one the best is Temur has so many great colors for tribal synergies. We saw that a lot when I brewed my Miram deck, and I kind of went down that route. But what I liked about this deck was we got to play two kind of fun game plans. We still get to play the elementals, and a lot of our elementals really care about landfall triggers, so that makes that really easy because we're going to want to play that anyway. We get to blink or copy Omnath if we want to continue to trigger that top ability, dealing damage out. The bottom ability spreads counters around, and it's going to end up drawing us cards. And so I think there's a really easy way to kind of get as much value as we can. And not only that, but a lot of our elementals are big. If not, we're going to grow them with certain abilities and cards. So let's first start off about talking about the key elementals we're really looking forward to. One of the first ones that's important to doubling up all the triggers we have is Ancient Greenboard. It says we can play lands from our graveyard, which is great if we're using things like fetch lands or lands that sacrifice to go get other lands. And if a land entering the battlefield causes a trigger ability of a permanent you control trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So this is going to double all of our landfall triggers, which is pretty great because there's a lot of great landfall triggers in our deck. And it's a 5/7 body with reach, which is pretty cool. We have a Shia, Soul of the Wilds. Toughness and power are equal to the number of lands we control. And non-token creatures we control are forest lands in addition to their other types. So this is great because this is going to turn all of our creatures into lands and allow us to get landfall triggers off of all of our creatures. The other thing I like about a Shia's ability, which comes up every now and then, is it turns all of your non-token creatures into lands. So our opponent tries to use mass bounce things like Filter Out or Cyclonic Rift, where we're going to get around that for our non-token creatures because they're going to be considered lands. That doesn't come up too much, but it is beneficial in some instances if people can't target lands with their things. Say they're playing Stroke of Midnight instead of Beast Within, they're not going to be able to target our creatures because they are considered to be lands. And that I think that benefit's going to come up every now and then. We have Avenger of Zendikar, one of the classic landfall finishers. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we make a 0/1 plant for each land we control. And then when a land comes in, they all get +1/+1. The later we see Avenger of Zendikar, the better, but I think it's also a really great blink target as well, or copy target. It doesn't have to just be an Omnath that we want to blink or copy. I think Avenger of Zendikar is great for it as well to get us more plants. Green Sleeves, Morrow Sorcerer. Same thing, it's a star, where star's the number of lands we control. Whenever a land comes in, we get a 3/3 Badger. This card is very easy to make go off. We can get a bunch of Badgers to attack and defend with, and work our way towards our end game. Omnath Locus of Rage, our 2-mana Omnath. Whenever a land comes in, we get a 5/5 Elemental, and then whenever it or another Elemental dies, it deals 3 damage to any target. This is a great card because it's getting us more Elementals for the purpose of Omnath's ability, but dealing out that damage is going to be beneficial if they die or we need to use them to block or that kind of thing. And then one of the powerhouses in the deck, Risen Reef, whenever it or another elemental comes in, we look at the top card. If it's a land, we can put it on the battlefield tapped. If we don't, we put it into our hand. This is kind of a play on what this Explore ability, but instead of that land coming to our hand, it goes on the battlefield tapped, which is pretty cool. But this is a great ability because we're going to find a way to keep getting lands down, keep getting triggers, and potentially keep getting blink effects and things like that. One of the big things we're going to use to kind of push our landfall strategy forward is a way to either recycle our lands from the graveyard or put them back in our hand to play them again. You know, eventually we're going to run out of lands from our hand, but I think there's great ways to tap them for mana and then bring them back to our hand to play them again, trigger our landfall triggers again, you know, to keep going. And we have a couple creatures to do that. Living Twister has an ability, one green, tap it, return a tap land you control to its owner's hand. This is pretty cool because we can use that mana to do something with it, and then, you know, return it back to our hand and use it again. Mina and Den say you may play an additional land in each of your turns, and we could pay a red and a green to return a land to its owner's hand to target creature gets trampled. This is pretty great because we're going to be stacking up counters on some of these creatures, hopefully with Omnath's ability, and that's going to allow us to give them trample and get another landfall trigger as we push one back to our hand to play again. We're playing Trade Routes, has two abilities, one colorless for each. The first one, return target land you own to its owner's hand, and the second one, discard a land from our hand to draw a card. This is great, particularly for the first one, because we can tap something like a bounce land and, you know, for mana, return it back to our hand and play it again, bounce another land back to our hand, and have multiple land drops in the same turn just from one card. And then we have a couple lands themselves that do the first. Aboro, Palace in the Clouds, says for one colorless we can return it back to its owner's hand, and then it comes in untapped. So that's pretty cool because you could tap it for its mana, the blue mana it makes, and bring it back to our hand and get us multiple land drops that way. We have Ghost Town. At a colorless mana random pool, and for 0, we can return it to our hand, but only during another player's turn. This is cool because we could do it during that last opponent's before our opponent's, before our turn, and get it in our hand and have it ready to play. And then Undiscovered Paradise. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Beginning your next untap, return it to its hand, our hand. So that's pretty great because then we can play it every turn. You know, get that landfall trigger and take advantage of it coming in. You know, again and again, and hopefully getting more of those plus one counter triggers, more of our other landfall triggers, whether they're making tokens or doing other things, and keep pushing our strategy forward. But okay, we talked about the landfall triggers, we talked about the key elementals. Let's talk about our kind of blink and our counters strategies, and we also have a couple kind of finishers in here as well. One of the first big finishers, especially when we're playing lands, as Marog, Fury of Akum. This is a creature that says each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it's attacked this turn. It says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this one. Beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. So ideally we want to play that land main 2 after our first combat, untap everything, and they get another combat. Now if that creature attacked in our first combat, they would already have +1/+0, and that would just continue to grow. We would start, you know, doing more and more damage if we can get multiple land drops in a turn and have access to multiple combats. Thassa Deep Dwelling says at the beginning of our end step, exile up to one other target creature you control and then return it to the battlefield under your control. This is one of our, of course, great blink outlets because it has indestructible, so someone have to exile its removal, and eventually we can use it in combat if we want to. But blink Omnath for the damage, blink Avenger of Zendikar for more tokens. We can blink a lot of these creatures in our deck that have landfall or ETB abilities to get more things. Phylath is kind of just like Avenger of Zendikar, where it gives us a bunch of plants. The only difference is whenever a land comes in, we put 4 counters on one of them, not a counter on all of them. So very similar to Avenger of Zendikar, just not as easy to get up to that threshold quickly. We have something like Spark Double, which can copy any creature we control, except it comes in with an additional counter. It's not legendary. So this is great for Omnath, because we can get a second copy of Omnath, get that trigger, get that damage, and then start stacking up more +1/+1 counters, you know, at a time as we keep playing. Or playing something like a Renikis's File Duplication to copy a creature, except the creature has flying and isn't legendary. Again, great target for Omnath, but it could be a great target for Avenger of Zendikar or something like that if we need another copy of it to keep ourselves going. Well, we're eventually going to have enough mana, and a great way to finish the game is with something like Finale of Devastation. For X double green, we search our library or graveyard for a creature card with mana value X or less and put it on the battlefield. If we search our library this way, shuffle, and if X is 10 or more, creatures we control get +X until end of turn and have haste. This is going to be a pretty easy way to get a big creature, put it down, or get a creature that gives us some sort of utility value, put it down, give a big buff to our board, and swing. If we need to use this on the low end, we just get a key creature we need and put it down and call it a day. We're also playing something fun like Awake in the Woods, which is going to make X/1/1 forest land creature tokens, which is going to get us a bunch of landfall triggers at once, and that could be really helpful depending on what we have out at the time. We're trying out Virtual Knowledge from Wilds of Eldraine, a new card to this build. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So this will go off of creatures and lands, depending on what comes in. And then on its adventure side, we can copy a target activated or triggered ability, which is pretty cool because we could copy Omnath's ability, we could copy its last ability if need be, we can copy a bunch of other things. And so that's pretty helpful because it can be utilitarian depending on the moment, but then its regular side is kind of another copy of that Green Warden type ability where we're just doubling up on our things. Another fun card, depending on how big of a creature you have. If you're a really big creature doesn't have trample, we can use something like Elemental Mastery. We enchant a creature and it taps to make X 1/1 red elementals, where X is this creature's power. This could be fun for a bunch of creatures, but hey, if you're a big creature like a Shy on the ground who doesn't have trample and you don't think you could get it in effectively, make 15 or 18 1/1s and have those slam in and deal some damage. You know, it's interesting to see what scenarios you can make with Elemental Mastery, and I've seen it do a ton of work for me on different battlefields. And then Retreat to Coral Helm, one of the most popular landfall payoffs. Whenever a land comes in, choose one, tap or untap a creature or scry one. This allows us to hopefully tap people's boards down, help them prevent them from blocking us and leading towards a better scenario. We have things like Shared Animosity to buff all of our creatures when they attack. And then Simic Ascendancy is another win-con, since we're putting +1/+1 counters around. Every time we put a counter on something when Simic Ascendancy is out, it gets a growth counter. And then at the start of our upkeep, if we have 20 more growth counters on it, we win the game. Simic Ascendancy will very rarely do us any work other than threaten to win the game for us if we can't find any other way to do it. But I think we have enough things in this deck. We have Trample Enablers. We have ways to grow our creatures. I think we're going to find ways to do it in combat, but I think Simic Ascendancy just allows us a chance to do it otherwise. Well, I've said time and time again on this series, we brew these decks and we brew these 1.0 deck ideas, and sometimes we miss cards or we don't always have it right. And here's a couple cards I really thought that fit the deck really well, but I just couldn't make works in the slots I wanted them. First up is Wave Goodbye. This is from that new Merfolk precon. Return each creature without a +1/+1 counter on it to its owner's hand. This could be a one-sided board wipe to help us out to pick people's things back up and get us a big lane to attack. We are playing Raise the Palisade in the main deck, which just says return any non-elemental creature is what we'd choose to throw in his hand. But I thought Wave Goodbye could be good as well because it would allow us those plants that are coming down off of like Avenger of Zendikar and Phylath, if they had counters on them, they wouldn't get bounced, whereas they would with Raise the Palisade. So I just thought, that could be good depending on where you place it. And I think more often than not, it's going to be good. Reflections of Lijar, whenever we cast a creature spell of our chosen type, we copy it. This could be good because the second copy of Omnath would still be good. It would come in and deal damage, and we would just have to get rid of one of them. But I think it still would be more than worth it. And one of my favorite cards on this type of strategy, Molten Echoes. Whenever a non-token creature of the chosen type comes in, create a token that's a copy of it, except it has haste. Again, copy Omnath, copy our two-color Omnath, copy Green Warden or those. I still think this card feels really good. I just couldn't find the slot for it because I wanted to focus a little bit more on the landfall strategies as well, rather than just going full tribal. But I think these are the kind of cards that could fit our strategy pretty well if that's what we wanted to do. But let's get into our goldfish. I always like to end these videos with a goldfish hand or two because, sure, everything's great in a vacuum, but until you start trying to figure out how does the deck actually sequence, how does it actually function, it's very hard to understand what you might want to do. Now, of course, our deck, we want to get as many elementals down as we can before we get Omnath down to get some damage, but at the same time, we don't mind it because once we get Omnath down, we can start getting +1/+1 counters. So we're just going to play that Path of Ancestry there in tapped. Turn 2, we're going to play this mountain, and we could do trade routes, but I think I'm just going to get the Signet down here, get ourselves ready. This would be a turn 3 Omnath, which is what I think I'm going to do. Yes, it only deals 1 damage to somebody, but I have a ton of things in my hand that are going to let me start getting lands down, as well as we do have Thassa, so we get to scry 1. It's a forest. I don't think I need the forest just yet. I mean, we have a land in our hand, we have a cultivate. I'd like to see what else we can draw. We draw an island, so we have 5 mana turn 4. I like the idea of Roaming Throne because that could start doubling up our... I think if I was doing it here, I would do Roaming Throne first, then drop this down, put 2 counters on, Omnath, would get a good attack in there. And next turn we see Animar, which is a great elemental, reducing the cost of our creature spells, and it gets bigger as we go. We could put this Yavi Maya down, get another 2 triggers, make it up to a 7/7, maybe put Thassa down if we want to. Well, let's see. If we put Thassa down and we bounce this, we lose those counters. I'd say maybe Animar, and then we could cultivate, allowing us to get a couple lands. We'll put a forest in tapped, and we'll put a mountain into our hand. That would get us another Omnath trigger. Maybe this time we put those on Roaming Throne. And now we have 3/6 lands, so we're not up to that threshold yet to draw cards, but that's okay. Take a big attack with Omnath. Here we play another mountain, put those on Roaming Throne, just in case we want to blink Omnath for more damage. We put down that Florhedron for a little bit of mana. Now we're at 7 lands now, so we're still 1 off this, but I think I like putting the Thassa down here and starting to blink Omnath, because now we're up to 4 elementals. So what's cool about this blink is at the end of our turn, we blink this Omnath, it comes back in. Sure, it's going to lose those counters. But Roaming Throne's going to go off twice, so it's going to deal 4 damage twice, which is pretty cool. Our next turn, we can play this Living Twister and this Trade Route, still keeping, I believe, Heroic Intervention up. And we could return a land back to our hand if we want to. We could just see how that works out. But again, take a big attack with Roaming Throne, or now Animar's getting kind of big. We can start putting lands on Animar as well, because you can make things cost less. Again, at the end step, now we blink Omnath. Now we get 2 triggers of 5, and as you can see, this is where we start to gel and kind of start getting our momentum forward as we're dealing damage, and again, putting our counters on our other creatures to get them buffed up. And then now this turn, we top Avenger of Zendikar. Comes down for 6 because of the Animar, or comes down for probably 4 or 3 mana because of the Animar. It's going to make 7 plants. Again, we go to combat, put some counters, go to combat, attack with Omnath, come back out, flash back in with the Thassa. Now we're dealing 6 to everybody. We could always use a Living Twister's ability to get a couple lands back to our hand to play again. We have the trade routes to do the same thing. So you can see now if we don't draw lands, it's okay, because we can tap a land for mana, bounce it back to our hand with one of these abilities and play it again, and allow us to keep generating value. Then now we have a board state where Omnath is going to keep doling damage out as we have this big wide board state for us to deal with, and we're holding up this Heroic Intervention for some protection. But let me know what you guys think of Omnath down in the comments below. Like I said, the deck list is in the description for you, and I will catch you guys next time.